It's lesson 12, part 2, and we've added sorting capability, as well as a keyword search. Now, much like when we first added our sorting, our keyword search is now functional, but there's one kind of usability issue. Just like we had a little usability issue with the sorting. Anybody have an idea how we could improve this? It is functional. I'd suggest there is one thing we should be adding to this when someone enters a keyword and searches. Any thoughts about how we can kind of clean this or polish this up a little bit? What's missing? Okay, that's a good one, Megan. Yeah, I think we should do that. So, I search for, right? We just get this. So, yep, that's one. We should do that. Ivan, you're talking about like an autocomplete. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Probably it's pretty complicated to actually implement. So I think I'll leave that out. But I mean, I love the idea, but can be pretty complex. And you basically have to have a big list already to populate from. So if I search for something, I search bean and I get this. There's no indicator once the page reloads, the user can't see what they actually searched for, right? It's up here in the URL, but it doesn't display anywhere. So what I want to do is if we have a keyword, I want to then put that keyword back into the search box so the user can see what the search term is that brought up these results. And then we do need to do, yes, absolutely what Megan said. If nothing is found, we shouldn't show this. So let's do both of those things. So we want to echo out the keyword variable in here. The problem is we're reading it down here. So I'm going to move some of this code. I'm going to cut this out of this section because I want to do this check before we get to our form. So if the user is searching, we can then take the keyword and place it back inside our form. And remember, the reason our form it's blank is because HTTP is a stateless protocol, which is why we're using sessions for login. When this page reloads, whatever was here is now gone. So I'm going to cut these lines where I initialize the keyword variable to null, and then we check if there is a get variable, and if there is, we update the value. So I'm going to cut that out of here. And I'm actually going to put this up here. After our check where we put in an add item. So if we put this, by putting this code above the form, we can then echo out the keyword variable here. So I'm going to print out the keyword inside our input box. So this will give the appearance of what's called a sticky form. The user can enter data in the form, and when the page reloads, the data that they've entered is still there. So we'll try this. So now when I search for something, right, that value stays here. So I can see, I know what I'm searching. So it'll stay here. Now we should also take care of the scenario that Megan outlined. If we enter a search term and nothing is found, we should show a message, and we don't really want to even print the table heading. So we're going to run our query and call fetch all. But before we start printing out the table heading, we actually should check, did we actually get anything here? So we can evaluate our items variable. If our query doesn't return anything, items is going to be null. So what I'm going to do is take all of this code starting here that generates our table. I'm going to indent all of that because I'm going to wrap everything about printing out our table inside of an if statement. So we'll say, if items is null, so we can just do it this way, and then else, so all of the code that we wrote to print out the table is now going to get wrapped in an else statement, which I'll close down here. After we close the table, we're going to close the curly brace. So we're still going to disconnect no matter what, but we're only going to create and end the table if we have some items returned in our query. Otherwise, we can print out we can use an alert saying no items found. So if our query doesn't return anything, we're going to show a message in red saying no items. Otherwise, we will just have all the output that we've always had. Create the table, list everything in the table, the images, the links, all the data, close the table. Okay, so my list still works. I search for something, everything's working fine. But if I enter a search term that doesn't match anything, instead of the table, we get this instead. Okay, so that if else was right after our fetch all statement. And again, the closing of that else condition, the closing of that curly brace, it happens right after the closure of the table, which is down near the bottom of our page. Megan, thanks for the suggestion. We also need a quick way, right after I search, maybe I want to get back to the full grocery list. There's no simple way to do it. So what I want to do is clear out what's in the text box, remove any filter. There's an error if you search after sorting. Okay, let's try. Right. Okay. It still actually worked for me. We can fix that though. If you are getting an error with that, here's how to fix it. In our form, we just have to specify that the action equals items.php. Without the number sign, that should work. So if it gives you an error, that should fix it. So then even when you search, you get the number sign. Sorry, when you sort, but when you search, it's gone. So try adding that. Does that work, Megan, for you? Great. So I also want to add, before we add our category dropdown, we also want to add a clear button, right? So if I do, something like this, search, I can clear the form. It'll wipe out the text box and it will just reload things. So let's add a second button here. But this one we're going to style it as a button, but we're just going to use an anchor tag. So we'll give it a class of btn primary. So basically, this is just going to reload the page and remove the keyword. So it will remove any filtering or any sorting. I mean, it does the same thing as the grocery list link in the header, but it's just a little more obvious to the users. Oh, okay, I searched for something, and now I just want to reload the list without any kind of filtering. We know that we can just click grocery list again. But now if I click clear, my page will reload and any filtering is gone. So it's just a link. It's just, in effect, refreshing the page with no filter. It clears out the keyword, which removes any where clause in our SQL, so we get our full grocery list again. So the last thing we're going to add in here is our drop-down list. So after our keyword, we're going to add a select box. Our name will be category ID. We're going to need to move our database connection up above. We're going to move it out of this section because we're going to need to connect to the database, query the list of categories, and create a drop-down list. So I'm going to move my connection inside Now we already have a drop-down list with all the categories. So we could write this code again, but what page already has a drop-down list with the categories? We could just copy that code. Well, actually, sorry, you know what? We won't copy it. That page is a bit different. We'll just write it. That might actually be easier. So we're going to select star from categories, which I will spell properly. Order by name. We'll prepare our command. Execute the query. Yeah, Megan, it is on item details, but there is a little additional logic on there that we don't really need yet. So I'll just rewrite it. Categories. We'll call fetch all. So this is going to give us the list of categories, and then we can just use a loop to create the options. So we'll set the IDs as the values. And the category name as the text for each option in the dropdown. Yes, it is CMD execute. Thank you. Thanks, Quinlan. Nice catch. I'm not going to close the connection because we're going to use it later on. Okay, Adil has a good question. How come, why am I getting this DB being underlined in red in my code editor? Anybody want to answer? Anybody think they maybe have an answer at Adil's question? Good question. Why is PHP Storm complaining about this variable? Right, so it's not in the scope of this file. So where is this DB variable initialized? Right, Megan mentioned it's in the header. Sorry, it's not actually in the header, it's in. So the variable's declared here. It's okay, Megan. You had the right idea. So Adil, it complains because we're using this variable, but it's declared in a separate file. At runtime, the files all work together. But PHP Storm's not smart enough to understand this. Yes, Ivan, I'm just going to make, once I'll check that the drop-down list populates, and I will push again. I did push at the break. So I pushed 20 minutes ago, but I can push again in a minute. So now we get our drop-down list in alphabetical order. Okay, code is updated. No problem. So now we also want to be able to use this filter. So if I pick produce and search, notice my keyword is empty, but my category ID is 1. If I pick seafood, gives me the category ID. So we should also be checking for a category ID Now, we did actually break something. There is a bit of a problem here. Right? If I go and search for burger now, what's going to happen? How have we managed to break this? Well, actually, it will work right now. But as soon as we add, okay, sorry, we'll keep going. We'll see the problem in a minute. So now we want to go back further down to our query. So here was our original query. We're checking for a keyword, but we now need to do the same thing for the category ID. Right? So we can also filter by category. So up here at the top, we'll initialize category ID as a variable. We'll initialize it equal to null. And if it's set, I'm going to put one extra check in here because not only does it need to be set, but this needs to be numeric. If the user changes the URL and types a string in there, we're going to ignore it. So if it's the value set and it's a number, then we'll populate our variable. So I've added line 13 as well as lines 19 to 23. So we're going to check the URL, see if there is a category ID parameter. If there is, we're going to need to we're going to store that value in a variable if it's numeric. And then we're going to include it. We're going to need to modify our query again, like we've already modified it for the keyword. So I'll leave this code up for a minute. Then we'll come down here. So we can say if our category ID doesn't equal null, now what should our SQL be in this case? Because now it's going to get a bit more complicated. Before, when we had a keyword, we just added on the where clause. Why is it going to be a little more complex with the category ID? When we're dealing with our keyword, we have two scenarios. There is no keyword, so we just ignore it. Good guess, Megan. No, it's not quite what I'm thinking. Let's look back at the form for a second. Right, when we just were doing the keyword search, it's pretty simple. Either we have a keyword and we use it, or we have no keyword and we don't use it. We just get everything. But once we add this in, there are two possibilities with the keyword. One possibility is we have a keyword and a category. The second possibility is we have no keyword, just a category. So if we have a keyword, we have two possible where clauses then. So let's kind of lay this out for a minute. So if we have a keyword and a category, what does the where clause look like? So what would our SQL be? So select, ... And then what will our where clause look like in this case? So the users type something in the text box and pick the category in the dropdown. So we'd have where. Right. Okay. You got it, Chris. So I'll just copy and paste that in. Great. Right. So here's our where clause. And to make our SQL more readable, I always advise using all caps. Thanks, Chris. What if we have only a category? Let's select. ... So what would this be if the keyword text box is empty? How's that where clause going to look in that case? Right. Thanks, Megan. So our challenge really is around the word, the SQL commit keyword that precedes the category filter. If we have both, we've got where in front of the name and we've got and in front of the category. That's this scenario. We've got where and. But if there's nothing here, we can't use and, we need to use where in front of the category. Yeah, Megan, we are going to have to deal with that. Right now, they're always going to have a category, aren't there? Which we don't want. So yes, we're going to come back to that. So we have two different versions of the where clause, right? So here's one version. So we need an if-else statement in here. So I'm going to say if keyword is not null, we're going to append it on. And then we have to do this. We have to say if so if we have both, we'll have to say and, that has to start with a space. Oops. So if we have both a keyword and a category, we're going to use where and. If keyword is null, then we have to use where down here. And Megan, that's a good point you raised. We'll come back to that. Right now, the category is never going to be null, but we'll deal with that. So we may have two conditions in the where clause, or we may have one. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this logic. And then we also have to bind the parameter. Down below, if we have a category ID, we have to populate this parameter with it. So we'll add this logic. And again, before we execute, we'll say if category ID does not equal null, we're going to bind that parameter. And this is going to be an integer. We don't need the percent signs around this. It's just an integer. It's not a string that we're searching inside of with wildcards. And this has to go before we execute the query. So we've got potentially three different versions of the where clause. We could have only a keyword. We could have a keyword and a category. We could have a category only. Or we could have none of these. And we're going to bind each parameter. So let's see how this works. And then we're going to have to deal with the scenario that Megan mentioned. Right now, the category is always there. We have no option to select keyword only. So now if I pick a category, if I pick bakery and search, I have to put my password back. Oh. Let's see. Okay, what did we do wrong? So let's go to seafood. Okay, something's wrong. We're not quite there. I need to disable my try catch block and let this crash and burn. So I'm going to comment out my try catch. So we can see what's going on. Try it again. Okay. Category ID is ambiguous because both the items table and the categories table have it. So what that means is in our where clause, doesn't know which table. We could actually use either table for this. Doesn't really matter. So this has to be their keys. So I've got to reference it as either items.categoryID or categories.categoryID. Note, we already have the from. The from's in our original query. So that part's not changing. No problem. We wrote it a while ago, right? We did this in week 3, so easy to forget what we did. See how see how easy it is to forget code we did not so long ago? Imagine going back to update code you wrote like years ago. Right? It's hard for us to remember even back a couple months ago. So we'll try it again. And now if I choose bakery, cool. If I choose seafood, let's also check how it works with our keyword now. So if I type burger and frozen, right? Both of those conditions now apply. I get frozen food only and only foods that match the word burger. If I want to clear it out, now also notice what happens with our drop-down list, right? If I search burger and frozen, it brings up the right results, but the drop-down, every time my page reloads, right, it just defaults back to the first option. So we need to make the drop-down sticky like we made the text box sticky, right? We're echoing out the keyword back in our keyword box. So we need to use the same kind of logic that we used on the category here. So it pre-selects the proper option in the dropdown. We're going to do that, excuse me. And then we also need the ability to only search by keyword and to have like no category selected, which right now we can't do, which I think is what Megan was pointing out earlier. So we need some logic in here that says if there is a category ID in the URL and that value is numeric, we want to pre-select that category in our list, in effect to create a sticky form so the user can see which category they're searching in. And if I search burger in seafood, I get nothing. But my option should stay selected here. So just like we added some logic into our input, excuse me, we're also going to check here as we're printing the categories into the dropdown. We want to say, does this category match the category in our URL? If it does, we want to pre-select that. So we can say if the current category ID is equal to our category ID variable, we'll do an if-else. I'll move the existing code into the else. Just print out a regular option. And if the current category matches what's in our URL, we're just going to add on the word selected here. So this will pre-select the category that the user searched on, rather than it just defaulting back to alcohol, which is the first one. So here's that little block. We can try this out in a minute. So now when we search, whatever category we pick, our dropdown should stay showing that category when our page reloads. Right, so right now, if I search burger and frozen, I get the frozen food. I have two frozen food categories. But now my drop-down stays. If I pick frozen and pantry, it keeps the category that I picked. So we've now made our drop-down sticky. So we've only got one more task to do with this, which is we want to add a default option here that says like choose a category or something. And if the user doesn't touch the drop-down, it means they're doing a keyword search only, and the category ID needs to be ignored. So inside our drop-down list, first of all, we're going to hard code in a default option. I'm going to give it a value of -1. And it'll say select category. So if the user doesn't want to search a category, they only want to search by keyword, this is the default. This will appear at the top of our drop-down list. So now it looks like this. Except when I go back here now, I get nothing. So if I just want to search by keyword, it's no longer working. How come this no longer works? Why did I break this? So I just want to search for any products with beans. Regardless of category, when I search for beans in a category, it works. Thank you, Chris. That's exactly why. Because our category ID, it's not null, it's -1. So we need a little bit of logic that says if the category ID is -1, or maybe if it's greater than 0, then we're going to set that variable. But otherwise, we want to leave it as null. So up here, when we say if it's set, if it's numeric, I'm going to add one more check. We'll say if get category ID is greater than 0. So if there is a URL param called category ID, if this param is a number, if this value is greater than 0. So that way, if it's -1, the user didn't pick a category. So we're going to leave it as null. We're not going to set it unless all 3 of these conditions are met. We have a value, the value is a number, and that number is greater than 0. I guess this could probably be in an and, now that I think about it. If it's numeric and it's greater than 0, I could probably shorten this, now that I think about it. Yeah, I'll leave it this way for now. Probably okay. So now if I search for by keyword only, right, the category is ignored. So if I search burger in the wrong category, I get nothing. If I clear it, everything just gets reset. So now this is a lot more useful, right? So when I'm in the grocery store, and I'm actually going to use this app in the grocery store because I've been talking about having one forever and stopping using a notepad, right? When I'm in the bakery, I can sort and see everything here, or I could simply filter my list here. Okay, here's everything I need in the bakery section. Once I leave the bakery, I can clear the form. Now I'm in the dairy section. but I can also search by keyword. All right, so I need some chocolate. Oh, no chocolate on the list. Okay. So our code is getting more complex. It's really a whole bunch of simple checks, though, that we've added on a single page so that we can offer more advanced functionality than simply reading the data. We can let users manipulate the data in a way that it's more useful and more meaningful to them. Right? A full grocery list, totally out of order. I don't know about your grocery list. When I go to the store, I might have 50, 60 things on there. So to just have a list that we can't sort or filter can be kind of difficult to use. By adding our sorting and filtering, this is going to be a much more useful application. Does anybody have any questions about the things we've done today? I'm just uploading to GitHub now. Okay, good question, Chris. If we take that out, it's so that if we take out the percent signs, it'll work, but it's only going to search for an exact match. Oh, because you'd have to concatenate it. I think, you mean, could you just do it this way? I actually haven't tried it like that. So this is what you're thinking, Chris? Like, do we take out this line and just do it this way? Maybe it will work, actually. I haven't tried it. That's a good idea. Let's try it and see. If it'll work that way, well, that's better. Yeah, see, we get a syntax. Because see what it does is it wraps the string in single quotes, but those percent signs are outside of it. And the percent signs have to be inside the single quotes. So it just doesn't handle the quotes properly that way. It's a good question. Ivan, we could uncomment the try catch. Yes, you could. For now, I'm going to leave it because as we're still working on it, I would rather that it crashes and I can see the errors. But in your own version, if you want to put the error handling back in, absolutely, you can feel free to do that. So I promised you a timely class today. I like to keep my promises, like to be a person of my word. So we have actually done what we wanted to do. So for next week, here's what you need to do. Make sure you complete the sort and search in your LAMP food site on the items page. Code is now on GitHub for you to reference if you need it. There is a quiz on today's class, due next Monday at 5. And assignment 2, part 2, make sure you submit by 5 o'clock next Monday. Okay. Next week, kind of a different lesson. We're going to work with some APIs. So we're going to look at integrating some third-party services. Like we want to display the current weather. We want to add Google reCAPTCHA to our register page. And we're going to have a really small lab that'll take like 5 minutes next week as well. Yes, you're right, Megan. Here's the one challenge with it I found. I've used fixed bottom before, and it works great on pages like, when I used fixed bottom, it will anchor it to the bottom here. The one issue that I found, though, is on a page like this one, rather than putting it at the bottom of the list, it would put it like at the bottom of the window. I'll try it. But that was my experience with it before, and I never quite fixed it. But I'm happy to try it. Thank you for the suggestion. Let's try it and see. If it works, then awesome. Oh, okay. I think maybe they fixed that. Well, I don't know. If you like that effect, that some of the content appears behind the footer. I mean, it looks great on these pages. For sure, it looks much better to have the fixed bottom. So we could play around with that. So that would be in the not quite sure, Ivan, how you would define that. Maybe you can clarify. It can't be declared quite the way you've put it in the chat. Anyway, that's all for today. I'm happy to kick that around with anyone who's interested in the footer. But feel free to go. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week for our last class. I mean, I don't mind it like that the footer, but in many sites that are scrollable, you don't see the footer till you get to the bottom of the page, right? If we go somewhere like here, just stop the recording now.